The Canadian government formally fired back at President Trump's trade war today with a round of retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods exported to Canada. Today, several Canadian cabinet ministers announced counter tariffs that could run as high as 50% on hundreds of American products, largely matching the very same Canadian products targeted by Trump at the very same rates. Trump responded in a post on Truth Social saying, quote, "The United States is giving serious consideration to changing the name of Lake Ontario to Lake America, in that we don't expect to be doing much business with the Canadian province of Ontario any longer." You'll recall the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, said that Trump could, quote, "kiss my ass" yesterday. Several hours later, Trump posted an image of the map of Lake Ontario with his proposed new name in gold letters. Joining me now is MS Now reporter Alex Tabbitt in my hometown of Toronto. And you're at a ball game tonight, I understand.
That's absolutely right, Ali. We're outside the Blue Jays Stadium where we spent all day talking to Canadian baseball fans. Canadians, a group of people who are famously kind, famously empathetic, famously willing to hear out the other side. But what we heard tonight is a frustration and a group of people who feel like they're being pushed to the brink by President Trump in this trade war. I want you to hear just some of those conversations. How is this trade war impacting you?
Well, where are we going to get our aluminum from? If aluminum starts going up, I might be out of a job.
You could talk directly to him. What would you say?
I tell him to f*** off.
I'm fully behind what Carney's done. U.S. I know a lot of people down there, and I would not hesitate to have gone down there to visit before, but now I'm definitely second-guessing and avoiding it.
Yeah, I don't want to travel there. I don't want to give them any of my money, and I would have absolutely done that in the past.
And Ali, I just got in this morning from Fort Dodge, Iowa, a former Midwest manufacturing hub. There, I asked three-time Trump voters if they're in favor of these tariffs, if they're in favor of this trade war, if they're seeing the manufacturing boom which President Trump promised on the campaign trail. And to a T, all of those voters, those Trump voters, told me no. Yeah, the Blue Jays lost tonight, but here on the ground in Toronto, it feels like nobody's winning in this trade war. Ali?
Alex, thanks for staying up late for us. And if you need anything, my parents are just up the road from where you are, my friend. Thank you. Alex Tabbitt in Toronto. All right, joining me now is the Congresswoman Shelley Pingree, Democrat from Maine. She's a member of the House Agriculture Committee. Congresswoman, nice to see you. Thank you for being with us.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
You heard what that one woman said to Alex. And by the way, my parents have taken the same view. They used to visit me quite frequently here in New York, and they don't want to come to the United States. Now, you have a 600-mile border with Canada in the state of Maine. It's not just trade of goods. It's people. It's tourists who like going to Maine and Mainers that like going to Canada.
Absolutely. I mean, we've considered this an extremely long friendship, and there's a huge economic impact on it. But as you've said, we also have a huge tourism impact and a shopping impact. I mean, people who live near the border know which side of the border is the best place to buy something, and they have a long-standing relationship of going back and forth. But more importantly, tourism is our largest industry, and communities like Old Orchard Beach in southern Maine, they have the street signs in French and in English because we've had such a long-standing relationship with Canadian tourists. We're down about 30% in those border crossings over the last year or two, all because of the way that not only these tariffs have impacted people, but you've got Donald Trump calling Canada another state, talking about the prime minister as if he was the governor. We had J.D. Vance visit our state 2 days ago, which is obviously a mistaken trip for him, but he also called Canada a state. Now, right. That's just deeply offensive. And I've talked to so many people who say, you know, we still love you, but we're not coming there and we're not giving you our money.
Yeah, I do think that Canadians are able to make that distinction. I think their affinity for Americans remains, but their protest against the American government is much stronger than I've ever seen Canadians do anything. I have to tell you, Canadians are generally an agreeable bunch of people who, you know, go along to get along to go along. This is different. I mean, Canadians, my parents have a list of things that they buy at the grocery store to avoid buying American-made products.
Yeah, and please tell your parents and everyone else in Canada that we are deeply sorry, and the president does not speak for us. You know, another huge impact here in Maine, and this is true of a lot of border states, it might have been different 30 years ago, but we have such an integrated economy that blueberries, potatoes, lobsters, lumber, they cross back and forth across the border. Our lobsters this fall will go to Canada to be processed, and they will come back now with a tariff and not be able to be economically viable. This will hurt that industry. Blueberries get processed up there. We have a lot of different products that go back and forth. We have a lumber mill in Madawaska, Maine, where the pulp comes from Canada in a pipeline under the river.
Wow.
Everything is impacted by these tariffs, and it will just continue to grow.
I was talking to an economist from Michigan yesterday who said, you know, Michigan as the auto manufacturing center in America relies on the fact that on the other side of the river in Ontario, there's auto manufacturing that goes on. So together, the center has become big. When you start to dismantle these things, and he made the example, he said, auto parts will now move to the coasts in Canada, the West Coast to go to Asia and the East Coast to go to Europe. This has an impact on everybody. It's disproportionate in some cases. In a place like Maine, the impact will be disproportionate.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, I mean, we would understand if there was some argument for it, or if there was an actual American investment in manufacturing. If you want more lumber mills in our state or more lobster processing, and we wouldn't mind having those, you'd have to have real investment. And that's not happening from this federal government. In fact, they're pulling back. And when you look at the terms that the Americans were bringing at the last hour, and part of why this whole thing fell apart, it's embarrassing. Our attempt to interfere with their use of the French language or cultural, attributes, or just our desire to completely control them as if they were one of our states. I don't blame Canadians for being mad, and I don't blame the Canadian negotiators who were legitimate from leaving ours, where you got a president who says, well, now I'm mad, so I'm going to rename the Lake Ontario.
So if Democrats take control of the House and maybe the Senate in November and maybe the presidency next time, can you patch things like this up? I do worry that at some point people start saying, I'm going to change the way I do business. I mean, Canada sells more than 2/3 of everything it makes to the 2/3 of its stuff goes to the United States. They're going to start selling it to other people because they need to diversify.
Sure. I mean, they're going to negotiate these agreements with the EU. They're going to look for any kind of partner that they can. And that was yet another thing that the Trump administration tried to do, was to say, you're not allowed to have trade agreements with anybody else. Or if you do, we want say over them, or you have to meet with the same arbitrary conditions we have on Brazil or any other country. This would be a huge job for Democrats. But the president should be coming before Congress. As we know, one of the reasons some of his authority has been thrown out by the courts was because it's required to have a trade agreement come before the Congress and these kinds of trade agreements and treaties. So it's ridiculous the way he operates. And, we're all hoping we'll be in the majority, but we have our work cut out for us because he's done so much damage and been such an incompetent government.
Yeah, and, this business that Donald Trump always talks about, how the tariffs are paid for by the other country. In Maine, in a border the state, you fully understand how tariffs work. You fully understand that these things, and some tariffs are necessary in an orderly fashion, but this randomness just creates bad blood.
Oh, yeah. Our lobstermen are very worried about what could happen this fall on September 8th, when these things are implemented. And yes, of course we know. And again, we don't just pay it in dollars on those individual goods. We're paying it because our economy is failing. If you run a bed and breakfast or an inn in many of the communities that depended on Canadian tourists, you're in big trouble right now.